checkout tracking by the NPD group brings you a receipt collecting system that gathers data anonymously through technology we created, providing your businesses with answers.
I can hear myself. Okay, off to a good start. My name is Aaron Davies. I work at Oculus. I joined back in early 2013 when it was a little startup down in Irvine, California. It's interesting. I was just down there this last weekend and reminiscing about how far we've come in such a short amount of time. It's been a pretty exciting ride. I head up the partner relations team, which basically means myself and my team are the ones that are in contact with all of the developers who are working on making virtual reality experiences. So if you're working on VR and you don't know me, that's a problem, and it's probably my fault because I just have a hard time managing all the inbound stuff. But if I haven't gotten to you yet and you've already sent me something, within a year I promise I'll get back to you. It's been a crazy flood, but super excited about VR and glad to be on the panel.
Hi, I'm Callewaert. I'm part of the Evangelism team at UT Panelists. Our role is to, of course, go out there and educate our community and help our community, but also learn from our community and get feedback to our team to improve our technology. But also work closely with our partners, such as Oculus, on bringing the partner and our community in contact with each other and help to bring the games to their platforms. I'm super excited to be here. A long time ago, I studied VR when VR was horrible, not great. Yeah, and I was in the early 90s when I studied that, so it's a long time ago. So you can guess my age already. So let's continue now.
All right, nice. I'm Ray Davis. Yeah, so I work for Epic Games. I'm the Unreal Engine general manager, so I oversee development, release, support, all the bells and whistles, right? I'm a programmer by trade. I used to be lead programmer on Gears of War 1 and 2. Worked on things like Kinect. Actually spent some time at Microsoft, got to work on HoloLens as well. I'm very passionate about both VR and AR, where that's going, and things like natural user interfaces and speech recognition, all kinds of cool stuff ahead of us, I think. So, yeah, and at Epic, we're obviously a games company, so we're always building games, but we license the Unreal Engine, just like my friend here, Unity. And we feel like one of the best ways to make sure we're building the right tools is to be building this content as well. So we have a small team building VR content. We built Showdown for Oculus Connect last year. Last GDC, we actually got to partner with Wanda and do Thief in the Shadows, where we bought Smaug from The Hobbit and put you in kind of an intimidating situation. But yeah, that's in a nutshell.
And I'm Noah Falstein, Chief Game Designer at Google, and it's a great title. What it actually means is I do a mix of some game design on, much like what Ray just said, we do some of our own games to show off our technology and give them away as source code so that developers can take them apart and put their own games on those skeletons, and also to kind of prove out that the APIs we have are working and figure out how the stuff is going to work. And I spent a lot of time speaking both to conferences and doing videos to describe what we're doing to people, and coming out to conferences to listen to what's needed and try and be responsive to that. And I've been working quite a bit with both our Project Cardboard VR project and the Project Tango guys, who it's a little bit harder to quantify. It's a little of augmented reality. It basically does quite a few different things, but it's given me a chance to see a good range of what the different, I guess it's being called mixed reality. I was calling it transmogrified reality, but that hasn't quite caught on. Still like the ring of that. Mixed is just too colorless. I've been a game developer since 1980 and saw some very early demos, as early as I think 1984 was my first VR demos. It was exciting then, but obviously too early, and I think finally the time has come.
Good. Okay, so let's just jump right into development. I really wanted to touch base on, what are the issues that we're facing with from a development perspective when we're talking about VR and AR and any type of immersive technologies? How is it different? How is it more difficult? Is it more difficult? What are the obstacles for developers?
Is it on the hardware side or on the dev side?
On the devs. Let's talk on the dev side.
I think everybody has a different
Yeah. Although I have a feeling we're going to hit a lot of the same points too. So.
Well, yeah, one of the first things that jump out, just actually getting your hands on stuff to play and experiment has been a big challenge, which thankfully we're right around the corner on that, which will be fantastic. I think there's already so much enthusiasm from people like us driving in here, and I'm excited to see when thousands, if not more, developers actually pile in here and bring some crazy ideas to life, right? I think for me, the challenge is also, it's like a blessing and a curse, right? I kind of say, like, game development, we were getting close to sort of figuring it all out. I know that's trivializing it a bit, but like, we could put pretty pixels on screen fast enough and all that good stuff, right? And to be honest, for me personally, it was getting a little bit dull, because it sort of felt like, hey, there's not the same original challenge we had, when the consoles were first coming out and all that kind of stuff. So VR has been super reinvigorating from that point of view of like, holy crap, once again, we have the opportunity to build experiences we couldn't build before, right? This is a whole new thing. And I'm really excited, the magic really comes when developers take a step back and try to say, okay, I'm not going to try to take my mouse and keyboard or my game experience or whatever and cram that into VR, right? I think that was a lot of the early mistakes with mobile and touch, right? As people just try to translate one for one. But that's not really embracing the power and the innovation of what this platform can be, right? It is frustrating. The curse side of it is things like camera. For years, both on storytelling and games as well, control of camera is a very important thing, right? And now that's gone from us, and we're struggling to figure out I can build beautiful immersive spaces, but how do I move you without making you throw up, right? So there's obviously a lot of challenges like that still ahead of us.
Yeah, one of the things I love about the games industry is that we're constantly reinventing ourselves, and it's an industry where if you don't love change, then you're not going to be in it very long. And this is a big step, but more fundamental a shift, I think, than a lot of previous ones that we've done. Going from like 2D on a screen to 3D on a screen was very challenging, but going from 3D on a screen to feeling like you're actually in that environment is even more challenging. But from the technical side, certainly, but I'm primarily a designer, and knowing what kinds of experiences are going to work best in VR, that's really a difficult question. One thing that I've personally seen is, because there's that wonderful sense of immersion, many of the initial VR experiences I've seen don't involve representations of realistic people. And I think that's because it's expensive to do that well, and it would be super expensive to do it in VR in a convincing way. And not only that, but because you have this 360-degree view, you might need to have a lot of people out there all being rendered simultaneously. So those are things that we've struggled with on a small screen, and having the screen be all around you, I think, are going to get even more challenging. But on the other hand, I found that the sense of being in a place, immersion gets thrown around quite a bit, but this is the first kind of experience we've had that literally feels like you are in the midst of it all. We've said we put you right in the action. No, we've had you staring at a little screen in front of you that depicts as if you were in the action, but it's nothing like having your whole sensorium respond to the way you move your head and to be able to see what's around you. So it's very exciting and very challenging at the same time.
Yeah, I can only echo it. What I'm looking forward is that right now, everybody who's creating VR games or application is an immigrant. We're not native to it. We are still fully learning from it. We can only learn from our past experiences of going from the console back to mobile, where we had the hard lessons back on optimization, input, and it's the same. What for me the real excitement will be is maybe in 10 years where we're going to have native designers who grew up in the VR environment, who only think VR, and that is a big switch in designing, and that's what I'm looking forward. Maybe in 10 years I can play a game that's designed by a kid who's totally grew up in the VR world and doesn't know anything else, and that's why I think we'll push the barriers.
Yeah, just to echo that, I'm so jealous of my two little kids because the world they get to grow up in, right? And you think about it in the games industry, like when I got started. You probably have a longer history than me, but even when I got started, it was awkward when people ask you, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a programmer, I make software. And nowadays, it's a complete opposite, right? The world has transformed, gaming isn't accepted, it's a huge thing and ever growing, right? And just the pace of technology, I think it's exceeding expectations, right? The NVIDIA and AMD with the GPUs coming out and all that, and you talk about that dream of actually getting to photorealism in VR, that's, what I was saying before, equally scary and exciting, right? Because we truly will be someday able to make realities that you can't distinguish from the real thing, right? And it's very, very powerful, obviously.
Yeah, as I said for my kid and the 360. A nice example is we did a test, play a game. We give it to adults, and the first thing they do, they put the hardware on and they look forward. Well, as a kid, the first thing they do, they look around. They have never been told to look just forwards, and that is a total different design than they're going to have expected that.
One of the things we learn with cardboard, because of the nature of the device it is somebody sets it up and they want to show it to a friend, and because there's no strap, it's very easy to hand it to someone. But often you have somebody facing you, you set it up, you're now looking exactly the way you want to and say, here, it's all set. You hand it to them, turn around, they're now facing 180 degrees away from where you want them to look. And little things like that we've never had to experience before, we're having to deal with those sorts of issues now.
Yeah, on that note, it's kind of funny. It reminds me of a story when we were working on Connect. And traditionally with every game, every project, you have a QA cycle and a team that's constantly testing every build. One thing we didn't account for, but rapidly discovered, is Connect was full-body gaming, and our testers were getting tired, right? There was no longer they can sit there for 8 hours and play the game, right? And that's what I love about playing in this sort of new technology, right? Because you find these awesome little interesting trade-offs, right?
Well, and how does that, so going back to sort of the mobile versus sort of more stationary aspects of it, I mean, how do you see that playing out? Like AR, VR type of scenarios, or outside of markets for games? I mean, what are we looking at for the different platforms?
You start?
I think the very first thing I would say is that the consumer and even developer expectations are dramatically more aggressive than I think what the market will deliver. So I think for now we have enough greenfield space to explore the opportunities for VR that anything outside of that, at least from our perspective, is orthogonal and interesting, but maybe not as immediate as a consumer opportunity. And that's okay. There are some groups that are out there that are focused more on kind of academic learning and research and understanding how to make AR a viable technology, right? If you look back at the history of this current evolution of VR and the minds that have brought it to materialization, the first time I talked with Michael Abrash when we were both at separate companies about this before we both joined VR or Oculus was that AR was really the target, right? And Valve started into this this venture pathfinding. Okay, how do we make AR happen? And there are some interesting challenges to the mechanics of making that work that just aren't viable now, at least not at a price point that any consumer could afford, right? So I think the evolution, if I were to oversimplify, goes from true opaque VR, such as cardboard or Rift, where you're genuinely blocking out the world, to something where you have pass-through VR experiences that are, you could call them AR, VR. It's sort of, we refer to things on a mobile device that use the gyro as AR, right? So it's a liberal use of the term, but I think it'll be opaque to pass through, and then eventually, we're all hoping to get to AR. I mean, that's sort of the golden goal, but it's just going to take a lot of years to get there.
Well, the way that I like to put it is that it feels clear that we're moving towards a future where we'll be able to set it up so that we can mix in the real world with the virtual world and not have you be able to see the seams. And if you look at what's happened with special effects in movies, you can sort of see that progression of the really early crude special effects that didn't even look like what they were supposed to, but were sort of standing in for it. And then gradually it got better, and at some point, depending on what your acuity was, in the 90s to the early 2000s, even if you're an expert, you know that there is no such thing as Smaug the dragon, but it sure looks like he's out there, and you can't, it doesn't look like a green screen or anything else because the CG got so good at mixing real world acting and CG characters.
I strongly believe in AR, but I think there's a huge difference between AR and VR, and it will be always, I think, because some days I want to say, I really don't want to be here in this world. I don't want to mix it. I want to fully get out. Put me somewhere else. And I think that experience will always be there from get fully away and fully immersed in something totally different. Like a nice example, if I would be on an airplane and I have mixed AR, I don't want to see my neighbors in an airplane.
Well, and yet if your device knows where it is in the world and knows that the neighbors are around you, that could be pretty critical. So it's one of those interesting things where the gadget may actually still be in a sort of AR mode, even if it's letting you translate into a full VR mode.
Yeah, I would say that is the dream, right? Is an untethered VR, AR device that, based on the experience, or I've done prototypes, for example, where, hey, I'm in a full immersive VR experience. I can detect that you're coming up to walk to me, and I can just punch a hole into that experience. So, overcome some of the isolation things or something like that, right? I think if you dig into the technical side of it, we're probably more years away from that truly awesome device than we'd like to think. I know we probably talk a lot. I always use the example of, it takes a lot of horsepower to render this stuff, right? And especially as we go further and further with fidelity. Thankfully, technology is getting faster there, but things like, that much power, a battery big enough to hold that power so that I can have more than a 15-minute experience, right? And then there's this fun thing about physics of like thermal dissipation, right? And your smartphone gets warm in your pocket, it's okay, it's a little disconcerting, but not terrible. Something on your face getting warm, a whole different story, right? But
I don't know, what do you do in your free time? But
well, I've been lucky to try lots of prototype hardware, I guess.
So, well, good. So, I mean, let's talk about some examples. I mean, I'm really interested in sort of hearing about some cool examples that you've been seeing, that you've been involved with, that sort of touch what we've what are some really cool examples that you've got?
Well, for me, there's only a really funny one, and it's called "Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes." You might have seen that. Google it. It's really funny, but it's a game where it's just interesting because one person is fully immersed and one person is not immersed, and they have to play together. So the game is they have to defuse a bomb. One person has a manual and the other person is in VR and has to find unlock the bomb. But of course the manual is very bad and the person has to explain what's going on in the VR to the person in the real world. And for me, it's like, okay, it's not. Is it mind blowing? Is it groundbreaking? From a design viewpoint, there's nothing more funny to have two people communicate, one in the real world and one in another world, and try to find the solution. And that is for me like something groundbreaking, but it's really funny. And you should play it and watch out. Google it with the couples playing together. Then you're gonna have a good laugh.
I think for me at this point, I'm still focused on the excitement around technologies and capabilities and experiments more so than a single piece of content. I mean, if you look at something like Valkyrie, it's a fantastic piece of entertainment software. And the reason that it's good isn't necessarily because it's beautiful, which it is, but it's more about the fact that there's something novel about why you would want to do this in VR versus another medium, right? You've got this really interesting gaze mechanic. You can look around at things and lock on to enemies based off of that. And it's a really shallow learning curve, but over the history of working at Oculus, I've seen just these small, independent, isolated technological advances, like the difference of going from 720p to 1080p, right, is in and of itself, it fundamentally changes what you're capable of delivering. Mm-hmm. And then you go from orientation only to full positional tracking, which again introduces a lot of new possibilities and opportunities because it's the user as a point in space, and it introduces lots of really interesting design opportunities. And then the most recent thing that we've shown directly was Oculus Touch, which for me felt like the very first time looking at VR all over again, right? Because not necessarily only because of the hand tracking, which is elegant and beautiful and really accurate, and that's awesome. But as people come out of that touch experience, there's also a social mechanic to it that really kind of blows your mind, and you're like, okay, now I understand that this medium is more than about bringing a game like Call of Duty or whatever it might be, and those opportunities exist, but it's so much more than that. It's a connective thing that allows me to have an experience with someone who's in Mumbai, India, while I'm in Reykjavik, Iceland, right? And to reach out in virtual real-time space and say, hand me that thing over there, and to have someone else pick it up and hand it to you and have shared physics. And so those modules, those pieces of what makes for what we're calling today VR are where I find a lot of excitement. And it's not even necessarily like here's a consumer product wrapped up in a bow, right? And from here, I mean, there are so many opportunities with sensor arrays and synchronous versus asynchronous social connectivity, and we're really scratching on the surface. I think that if we look back even in 5 or 10 years, we'll almost chuckle at what we thought VR was at its emergence. But you know, the things that will bring it to something beyond a room experience are those new modules of interactivity and sensors and data streams that enable new experiences.
Hardware, software, the difference. Well, for me, another example, we did a test. I was at a company working at that time in the beginning of AR and VR, but seeing the impact is a virtual spider. People who are afraid of spiders. When I started to work on the project, to see that in how AR could help people to overcome fears, basically I laughed, like, who's gonna be afraid of a virtual spider? So we did the test. We made a virtual spider, put on the Oculus, and we measured the heartbeat and how much they sweat. And the heartbeat went up for people who are afraid up to 220 and left the room.
Wow.
Yeah, you know, I've been involved a lot with serious games before coming to Google, and I'm forgetting her name now, but there's a woman in Switzerland who's actually been using VR for phobia, people overcoming phobias for quite some years. I think, in fact, using an early version of the Unreal Engine for some of this stuff. And it turns out that almost everything, fear of spiders, fear of heights, fear of flying, VR was, you know, they do scientific studies, and it's roughly 80 or 90% as effective as having real spiders in the room or having them get into real airplanes. And of course, the advantages, it became a big deal with airplanes because after 9/11, they couldn't take people onto airplanes unless they had tickets. So before that, they would take groups into the airports and they'd get on the airplane and get off. They didn't have that option. And this is with, you know, 2000 era, you know, 2005 era hardware. So I think that we're going to see a lot more. And I did some work. It isn't VR, but there's a Dr. Adam Ghazali, who's the head of brain imaging at UCSF. I worked with him on a project called NeuroRacer a few years ago that coincidentally a lot of us who had been ex-LucasArts were collaborating on with him. And it was a game that he had essentially commissioned to work on that helped people. It was a driving game, a very simple driving game with signs that go by and you have to respond to the signs. And it turns out that your ability to drive well and respond or notice signs peaks at about age 24 and just gets worse after that. Not terribly surprising, but what they found is that using a game and using adaptive difficulty techniques that, you know, we're generally pretty familiar with to ramp somebody up again, they could take 70 and 80-year-olds who had a very poor level of functioning, get them back up to the level of, you know, not quite the 24, but about 30-year-old levels. And they were, you know, very good at this stuff, and then they didn't play the game for 6 months. And it turned out that they kept the vast majority of their skill improvement. And they're now working on a more sophisticated product that they're hoping to get FDA approval to treat people with. And if a game can be used for FDA approval to help improve people's mental conditions, I think it's not that much of a leap to see that VR is something that, you know, already you have something head-mounted, adding EEG or, you know, even some other type of brain sensors in there, you know, should be quite feasible, and lots of really interesting possibilities in the future. And now maybe we're talking 10 years down the road, but I think that it could have great positive effects on people for everything from you know, mental disabilities or PTSD to phobias to you know, helping people with you know, Alzheimer's or helping people with Asperger's be more functional. Lots of different things that could be done that way.
I just quick, how many people have already played here VR games on the Oculus or on the Gear VR? Okay.
You should do the inverse. Who hasn't?
Yeah.
Is there anyone who hasn't tried VR?
Few?
Awesome.
Okay.
All right. Come see me after the thing.
So good. So I mean, we talked a little bit of about serious games and sort of other applications. I mean, in terms of the grand scheme of VR, where do you see sort of the verticals kind of falling out. You know, I know Epic is doing a lot with visualization and construction. And
yeah, we were actually talking about this briefly before. I think a lot of people, actually I get this question a lot of, Epic Games who make games, what kind of VR game are you guys making? And we're like, well, you know what, I don't even know if VR is going to be about games necessarily, right? Like, I have no doubt there'll be fantastic VR games, there'll be fantastic VR films, but personally, I think the promise of VR is something new, something we haven't quite been able to do before, right? And so far, things that I've seen, I think it's going to have to deal with shared, persistent, VR experiences. Like you were mentioning, being able to, share that experience with people regardless of where you are, right? And have the same presence. I'm actually reminded at our, we've got several offices around the world, and communication is a big challenge for people. And it seemed kind of goofy, but we tried one of those little double robots, which is basically an iPad that you can, remote drive around. And it's just astonishing to have something that feels, it's not humanoid, but it's a little face and roughly the right height, and you actually get the feeling mentally, your brain clicks into that feels like a person there, right? Versus a traditional webcam or something like that. And then you see that VR gets us even further beyond that. And I believe you were talking earlier too, like, I feel like it's too early to be committing to, like, this is the consumer product that we're going to go build, right? Or sorry, the software experience. I think it's just still lots and lots of experimentation and learning and discovering and building better tools so that we actually, once we do figure it out, we can do a good job at it, right?
I mean, it's exciting for me to think we can't know, and we won't know until we can see in hindsight, but it's possible that right now, with the technology that we have right out there, the quintessential experience, whether it's a game or not, could be made. And if you look at, like, I worked on stuff in the early arcade games in the 80s, and at the Chart Boost party yesterday, we had a bunch of those games from 30 years ago, and they're still fun to play, and they don't quite measure up well enough to the stuff today, but the patterns of what was fun were discovered in many cases right at that beginning. And or something like Tetris that didn't come out until the mid 80s, but could have easily run on stuff as early as the late 70s. And if somebody had had that brainstorm of doing Tetris on the original Atari VCS, it could have changed gaming history. We might have that potential right now, whatever that VR title is, and somebody might be able to release it next week and have us all say, oh, of course, that's what VR is really good for. And maybe that's a few years away, but it could be next week.
Well, if you go to our website and you go to Made with Unity, then you're going to see how broad Unity has been used in applications, from hospitals, training people, from how to maintain objects, to making games, to art installations. I think VR will be the same. It will be across the board. And nobody will say VR is just for games or just for applications. It's an augmented reality. It's adding to an experience. It's learning faster, engaging everything more. VR will be a standard in everything. I think even in the kitchen, when you're going to make your food, if you see a microwave pimped out, I'm going to use that. Anything it can to make it more fun.
So how do you see that the monetization is going to be different?
I think there are new opportunities. One of the things that I think is most exciting about VR is that you can give objects dimension and space, right? I mean, think about collectibles or virtual items within your applications. You look at them right now on a 2D surface, and it's, you've got a little billboard or sprite or icon. It's cool, and there's obviously a business for selling those, but when you're in VR, and then you can suddenly expose the dimension of that object and have it feel like something that people genuinely own, or to have it be customizable based on what someone's avatar system might be. I mean, the Valve guys sell millions of dollars of hats for Counter-Strike, so there's a whole business to be made around that. But I think that's one example of where VR adds an opportunity, and certainly you have to translate if you're coming from another medium to know how to take advantage of that. But I see it as adding opportunity.
Yeah, I think one thing that reminded me of is the notion of virtual real estate, right? You imagine when we have these untethered devices, and for example, say I'm a Starbucks subscriber, so every time I see a Tully's, it magically remaps to a Starbucks, right? So I can have my, and obviously it's a contrived case, but you see the power of what that'll mean. And I imagine we're not that far off from having multiple layers of reality that you can opt into, especially in that augmented space someday, right? I don't know. I always get a little wrinkled or weird about when people are asking about advertising. Like we had a question about VR advertising today, and I was like, really? It feels too soon. Let's figure out what's awesome about it first, and then do the profit thing, right?
Yeah, but I think that will come faster than you think. When there's money to be made on that.
I think another tenet of what makes for good VR opportunity is that it really does have a value statement beyond just the novelty of VR, right? Because as consumers get these devices in a ubiquitous fashion, the novelty of stereoscopy and head tracking is going to wane, and there has to be some substance underneath that, right? But using the real estate example, maybe I'll translate it a little bit. Imagine that it's like Travelocity or TripAdvisor or something like this, where you have a preview of a hotel, right? I mean, raise your hand if you've not had the experience of booking a hotel and then showing up and the hotel is garbage, right? It looks nothing like the images. You can't hide behind that, right? There are orthogonal technologies like capture devices that allow for stereoscopic, panoramic imagery to be shared in VR. But as that becomes more and more ubiquitous, as that becomes, you know, something that a consumer can hold in their hand, it dispels all of this misinformation, right? So it's a great tool to expose people to spaces and dimensions that are different.
Yeah, I mean, apropos of that, something that we implemented with Street View is that if you double tap on your phone on the Street View icon, it actually brings it up in cardboard mode. And instead of just, you know, moving around on the screen, you can then pop it into cardboard and get that VR sense. And I'm going on a trip to Greece for the first time in a couple of weeks. And I was using it to check out the environs of some of the places that said, oh, it's a great view. I thought, well, let me see. And interestingly, there are so many photospheres that people have already posted out there from people being tourists that you can actually find, you know, certainly in places like Greece where there's a lot of tourists, you can find, you know, third-party views of stuff and say, oh, you know, that place, yes, I could see that it's the same one that was pictured in the ads, but it's probably 20 years older than the pictures they're using in their ads for it. And, you know, that kind of stuff is great.
Yeah, I said how many times you go on even on Yelp, or even on bookings, you just look at the pictures, but the pictures never show you really what it is. And if you have a premium for VR, I think everybody goes for it.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that you touched on is, yeah, we're seeing the same thing with Unreal. All kinds of industries outside of games and experts are now looking to this technology to be able to, you know, approach photorealism in real time, right? And it's at a massive convergence, and I think the VR renaissance, whatever we want to call it, has been sort of a catalyst for that. You know, I've learned so much about how to make films in the last probably 18 months because a lot of these teams now, they're the same thing. They're looking for the new thing. How can they stretch and create new experiences, right? And I think it's really fascinating too because each sort of expertise and profession there is bringing their own, you know, layers of knowledge and experience that we all bring together, right? One of the things about making really compelling VR is you have to have presence, and part of being immersed in there is having that world and those characters react to you, right? In a film, you never have to worry about that, right? You're just, you know, a disembodied observer. But it's something, fortunately, on the game side of things. You look at like games of GTA, for example, just massive amounts of simulation and AI to give that, you know, that moment of like, oh, wow, that might really be a real person, right? So it's great to see all that stuff finally coming together. Yeah.
So I don't know how much time we have.
20 minutes.
20 more minutes? Okay. I did want to ask Aaron a question about, like, what the hell was going on with that Times cover? Oh. Can we get an explanation, please?
We've seen some great memes. It was awesome for the meme world. So I was there when they were filming, and it's not even green screen. I mean, there was a picture of a beach scene behind Palmer, and I'm not sure exactly how that pose came out. That contortion is not quite human, but Palmer's also not quite human. He's superhuman. No, it's, you know, it's funny. I guess VR, it's a testament to the value and the readiness of the medium at this point in time. It's, you know, it's a homage to all of these failed attempts before us, but now it's really here, and pop culture is, you know, by the time pop culture gets it, you know that there's something there. There's some momentum that's not just a flash in the pan. we have a lot of fun with Palmer. I mean, he's the most disarming, charming, lovable guy, and the great thing about him is he doesn't care. You know, I mean, if you asked him what he thought about the cover, he'd be like, well, you know, if some people out there have some time to work on Photoshop, great, and more power to them.
I loved it. It was phenomenal.
Yeah. My favorite one was actually a GIF of Palmer jumping up and turning into like the F-14 from Top Gun. It was great.
Yeah, man, I've been to Twitter. Loved it.
Well, you know, we kind of covered a lot. I mean, do you have any like words of wisdom? I think everything has been sort of words of wisdom here, but like for developers, you know, really wanting to jump into it, what do you guys say?
Well, I've got a couple basic things. That one thing that has been really true is that a lot of your assumptions from doing other types of games or video or whatever are just different with VR, that it really requires a lot of experimentation, and you have to be humble, you have to be willing to try and fail. And that's true about game development in general, but it is more true about this. And in order to reach some of the things we're talking about and get those experiments going, I think failing fast is going to be absolutely critical. I would be very surprised if the companies that succeed just get one idea implemented and it's great. I'd much more expect to see people trying 20 different things. You know, it's like Angry Birds was, I think, the 53rd game from Rovio before they were about to file for bankruptcy when they finally got something right there. And I think VR is going to be potentially a similar kind of thing.
For my advice is if you're making VR, failure is part of it. If you don't embrace failure, you're never going to get somewhere. And another thing is that sometimes when I hear young developers like, okay, we're going to do it, we're going to go after the money. Well, it's not a monetization platform yet. It's really from early adoption and to see. But the biggest advice is learn from others. And I would go to user groups, attend as much as possible lectures to learn from others to create an experience from there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing that's been really great about the VR development group is everybody seems super open to share their learnings as well, which is hugely valuable, right? And I think, yeah, to echo it, it's like go in with open eyes. Don't try to take your existing experience or a game you built 10,000 times and cram it in VR, right? Take a step back and think about what are the novel new approaches you can go. And that, yeah, just, I think games have always been this. I imagine all creative arts is where you start and where you end up, usually wildly different, right? I've heard stories of the famed Japanese game designer who would like write out this massive document and it was fun on paper, right? My experience has always been like, yeah, we're gonna try that. Oh, actually that was awesome. Oh no, that was terrible, but what about that, right? And it's just that constant consideration that gets you to that magic, right? So go in there, don't assume, yeah, you're gonna strike it rich day one. That's not what this is about, right? It's just about making really, really cool new stuff.
I guess I would say don't, if you're getting started, you don't have to abandon everything that you know and that you're good at, right? This is not a forcing function for a total redefinition of who you are and why you've been successful and why you are able to make a living creating games or applications or whatever it is that you do. But you do have to be ready to discard or to rework some of those things that might not be appropriate for the medium. It's no different than, I guess one example would be, think of Street Fighter on iPhone, right? Street Fighter on iPhone is a terrible disaster because it's just not made for the medium. And so
I'm gonna tell my friends who told him.
Yeah, we've had discussions, so they already know my opinion. But you know, it is such an open field for exploration and for growth, and so to establish yourself as a developer who knows how to do good VR by getting into effectively a R&D phase right now and proving out some of those concepts that you think might be interesting, it's the best thing you could do immediately.
Mm-hmm. So we could take a couple of questions. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
So this question is kind of loaded, so feel free to answer however and makes an assumption, you know, of the question. It seems like all of the players, you all, to an extension, Sony and Valve, are playing really well together in a sandbox that's very competitive. So going back in time, some of you, probably all of you, have experienced the console wars and why do you think you all are, or why are your companies supporting in this way the ecosystem to pull it up? And alongside VR, when will AR get that same kind of momentum thing? And again, it's loaded, so answer whatever you feel is interesting.
It's interesting. The press was really hot and bothered and excited to have this question to ask after GDC last year, right? When Morpheus and Vive came out and were showing new VR platforms, and they expected it was going to be this really exciting answer, and it's not. We were very excited that those things happened because it validated the industry for one, right? And it also helps the developers who we're really focused on at this point to hedge their bets across these various different opportunities. It has felt a little bit like a technology fraternity up until now, and still for the most part does. It really boils down to individuals as to when it gets cutthroat and competitive like that, right? But the bottom line is, if you think about, across Google and Valve and Oculus and Sony, if someone wants to buy up exclusivity, they can pay a premium to do that, and that's fine. But as a developer, is that really in your best interests? Maybe if you're a shop for hire and you're just looking to make sure that you're making payroll for the next 6 months or whatever, yeah. But in our experience, we haven't gone too much after exclusivity because we don't want to put a sting on the developer where they're like, they're just sad, right? All these other platforms come out and they're exclusive to yours, and they're like, I wish I could have launched on that to know, what would have happened, and they just don't know. It leads to ambiguity. So. For right now, that's kind of what it feels like. On the platform side, I think there are different approaches and different benefits to each platform, right? And I think most of that content will be ambiguous, ubiquitous. But the Cardboard, if we draw a comparison between Cardboard and Gear VR, right? They're totally different consumer sets, I would argue. And I think one of the things that's really exciting about Cardboard is it'll be an insert in a magazine or whatever it might be, right? I mean, this exposes people to this new medium, and so it's fantastic. And then there are a different category of people who want this premium, higher cost VR experience that's a little bit, higher resolution and higher accuracy in terms of tracking, and that's fine. There are different audiences for those products.
Yeah, I was going to say much the same thing, in that one of the things that's been the reason that I believe that VR is really ready is that these aren't just 5 or 7 companies all doing the same thing. Each approach is quite unique, and from a game design standpoint, in some very phenomenal ways. Particularly when you think about the kind of controllers and the degree of control these different systems can do. And I'm very excited. I mean, I think part of why there's so much sharing of information is that, we've seen this in the games industry before, and it brings me back to the early 80s, early 90s, when we kind of needed to band together because nobody really knew what was going on. We were all exploring new ground. By the mid-90s, around 2000, things got a little bit more walled off, I think, as it's, all right, this is what games are like, this is what the genres are, and this is how we do it. But suddenly all bets are off, and we not only don't know which of these different systems will succeed, there's no reason to say that they might not all succeed for different audiences, for different purposes. And even, yes, Cardboard is definitely one end of the spectrum that way, but if you take something like, Oculus and Vive, those are very different types of solutions. It's something that's more of a sitting down versus walking around, and what do you do with dealing with the cord, and what do you do with Gear VR and not dealing with the cord but having other limitations. It's a really complex problem, and I'm really grateful that the industry is kind of returning to those roots of sharing stuff. That Chris Roberts has been getting a lot of press for what he's been doing with Star Citizen, and I knew him from when Lucasfilm was doing space flight simulators and X-Wing and our World War II flight sims, while he was at Origin doing Wing Commander and his version of that stuff. And it would, I think, drive some of the people, the higher ups of the company, crazy, because we'd get together at the trade shows and trade everything we'd learned in the last 6 months in more of a, hey, look what I did, I bet you can't duplicate this. In fact, I'm going to tell you how we did it, because I know by the time you've caught up with me, I'll be 6 months ahead of you. And it was a great thing for both egos and elevating the quality of the experience for the consumers, which was really what it was all about.
Yeah, I would say the games industry, it's definitely been that. Very, very few things are actually invented within the industry, especially you look at like the rendering technology we're just putting in now to do real-time dynamic GI. Like these are papers written many, many decades ago oftentimes, right? So the value of it often is your implementation and the timing of that versus it being like, my exclusive, I'm going to patent this so nobody else can do it. It just doesn't make as much sense in this space, right? I would say the other thing is, well, two thoughts is, I think everybody realizes VR is going to be huge, right? And if you extrapolate out 10, maybe 15 years, it potentially replaces all other forms of computing for us, right? If we can solve some of these really challenging problems. I know that's a little optimistic, but someday. So I think there's room. It's not going to be like a one company dominates this whole market type of thing. There's a huge spectrum we already see, and there's a value in that, right? The other thing is I think we have no choice but to band together, especially in these early days, because if we don't give consumers, users great VR experiences consistently, they're going to be turned off, and we're going to be hurting the overall effort to get there sooner, you know? The first time they put it on and the frame rate's not right or whatever, and they're like, oh, VR is not for me, you know, it's not my thing. And then we're just slowing down progress.
Well, from Unity, I echo this. It's about sharing knowledge, and Unity has been always like that. It's our philosophy of the democratization, give everybody the tools, they have access to it, and can have access and share it as much as possible. That's why we totally integrated the VR. We want to give that to the community. But also, as John Riccatello recently said, it's about solving hard problems. And this is something that our devs are very passionate about it and work together with Oculus really in depth and work with Google on solving the problems to make it easier for the community. And that is exciting on our side. Now on the AR side, to your question, for me AR has always been a difficult thing because currently at the moment as a commercial product the only thing that's available is holding a tablet in your hand and looking around, what is a very brutal way of working in AR. So that's why I'm looking forward to HoloLens. I tried it, I was impressed. As an AR experience, it's phenomenal. So,
yeah, I had a chance to try the Magic Leap demos as well, and you know I don't know when those will be available, but boy, it's amazing to see it.
Good. One more question.
Quick question.
One more quick question.
Yeah, since we're talking about the future of VR, now we've kind of seen with Oculus Touch, you know, we kind of know what Gen 1 of VR is going to be. What do you feel is going to be Gen 2? Are we talking about olfactory stuff, vestibular stimulation, haptic feedback? What do you feel like are going to be the key components?
I think everybody wants that. Not that, but I think the ultimate goal is to totally replicate and augment our existence. That is a goal that everybody wants.
Yeah, definitely like haptics, standardizing on some at least common set of input for motion tracked input. I think the other one too that some people are experimenting with is the combination of speech, like voice recognition with this. You know, I use a kind of contrived example, but I can reach out and grab this microphone and I can yell at it. Well, in this case, that actually does something, right? But in VR, I can actually make that combination of touch and voice do something that I can't replicate in reality, right? And then we start to really empower people to do even more things and get to that sort of superhero fantasy, right? So I imagine you'll see a lot more just complexity of VR experiences will probably be the more defining characteristics of Gen 2. I imagine you guys are working very hard on lighter, more comfortable, all that kind of stuff, right?
Brain connection.
Yeah, there you go, just straight to the Matrix mode, right? I think that's a natural expectation, is things will get smaller, lighter, more powerful too, right?
I think actually it's for Gen 2, if you really want to know about Gen 2, I don't think that it's a far leap from the type of experience you would expect, right, from Gen 1. Now, there's a difference between expectations and performance, right? I mean, we've got basically like, you know, a little bit better than 1080p resolution in Gen 1, and everyone's all excited about 4K and then 8K, and you think about the compute problem for actually doing 8K or even 4K at 90 hertz, and it's an impossible problem without getting creative about how you're doing that kind of rendering. So I think that there will be a combination of interesting optical advances as well as rendering techniques that will help to drive advances in the quality and the perceived quality of the product. I think that's really what Gen 2 is going to end up being about, more than like, can I put on a suit and feel like I'm running around a jungle, right? I mean, that's like the Clive Barker version of what we think Gen 2 is going to be, but I don't think that that's the reality. I think it's going to be about perfecting those systems one at a time, whether they're auditory or communications oriented or rendering and visual oriented, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, just to go off of that, I've seen speculation about if we can do really good eye tracking, you only need high resolution right where someone's looking, and that makes a lot of those problems a lot better. And there are some pretty amazing eye tracking possibilities out there. And when you already have a head mount, then it solves a lot of the problems that you have when it was eye tracking when you're sitting in front of a computer. So, and I'm not prophesizing that, but I agree that it's those kinds of unusual situations, unusual solutions. And in particular, I think the controller question is still wide open. I've seen a lot of different systems, and they all have their own advantages and disadvantages, and I think the jury's still out on what the best way or multiple ways to control VR is going to be.
Well, good. Well, thank you. Thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.